My name is Hannah Pierce. I'm 29, and a few weeks ago, I stood outside my own father's funeral like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. The man at the door didn't even look sorry. He just kept his hand up and said, "Family first." Behind him, I could see the soft glow of the chapel lights. I could smell the lilies. I could hear the low murmur of people who actually got to say goodbye. My stepmother, Tessa, sat in the front row in black silk, perfectly composed, her eyes dry. When I tried to walk past, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She just smiled like she'd already won. They thought they were closing a door. They didn't realize they were opening something else. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from. If you've ever stayed quiet just to keep the family calm, stay with me. This might feel familiar. I used to believe my father and I were unbreakable. That belief was forged the year my mother died. I was 16, too old to be held, too young to understand what silence really costs. The house felt hollow after the funeral, not loud with grief, quiet, like someone had unplugged the walls. Dad and I learned how to move through those rooms together, carefully, respectfully, like we were sharing a wound and didn't want to tear it open by accident. Every Sunday morning after that, he'd knock on my bedroom door around 7, soft knock, 2 taps, coffee's on. He'd say, we'd drive out toward the lake with paper cups balanced between us. He liked his black. I liked cream and sugar. The radio stayed low. Sometimes we talked about school, sometimes work, sometimes nothing at all. And somehow, that nothing felt safe. He never tried to replace my mother. Not with stories, not with platitudes. He kept her picture on the hallway wall. Brushed the dust off the frame every week, at Christmas. He'd take out the same ornament she'd bought years earlier, a cheap little glass star. He'd hold it up, smile, and say, "She always liked this one." Those moments mattered. I didn't realize how much until later, when I left for college. He hugged me longer than I expected. His arms stayed tight even after I tried to pull back. "Go," he said, "build something. I'll be right here." And he was. Through late-night calls, through breakups, through my first real job and my first real failure, when I decided to take out student loans instead of letting him pay. He didn't argue. He just nodded. "You're stubborn," he said once, smiling, "just like your mother." Tessa entered our lives quietly. She was polite, thoughtful, almost too aware of how to say the right thing. She remembered my name the first time we met, asked about my work, complimenting my independence. It all sounded generous, warm, and I wanted my father to be happy. After years of watching him eat dinner alone, that mattered to me. The wedding came fast. 6 months. I told myself that grief rewrites timelines, that people cling when they're lonely. I stood beside him that day, smiling for photos, listening to Tessa recite vows that sounded practiced. Dad glanced at me during the ceremony. I nodded, gave him permission he didn't need. The changes came slowly after that. At first, it was small things. A picture moved. A drawer reorganized. Tessa would say she was freshening the space. Then my mother's photo disappeared from the hallway. When I asked, Tessa smiled gently and said, "I didn't think it was healthy for him to see it every day. I didn't push." The Sunday drive stopped. There was always something else. A brunch, a commitment, Logan's plans, Brianna's plans. Dad apologized every time. He sounded tired when he did. When I called, Tessa answered more often than he did. "He's sleeping," she'd say. "He's resting. He's had a long day." Once, I heard his voice in the background, muffled. I asked to talk to him. She said she'd tell him I called. He never called back. Logan and Brianna settled into the house quickly. Logan needed help with rent. Dad paid. Brianna maxed out a card. Dad covered it quietly. Tessa called it family. I told myself it wasn't my place to judge. The first time something felt truly off was the night I came home unannounced. Dad was in his study, the door was closed. When I knocked, I heard movement, papers. a drawer sliding shut. He opened the door a beat too late, his laptop already closed. Tessa appeared behind him. "Everything okay?" she asked, smiling. Dad nodded too fast. Later that night, I woke to voices downstairs. Low, tense. I couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm. His voice sounded strained. Hers was sharp, controlled. When I asked about it the next morning, Tessa laughed. "You must have been dreaming." I wanted to believe her. Then, one afternoon in the kitchen, Dad leaned against the counter like the floor had tilted without warning. He steadied himself, took a breath, looked around as if making sure we were alone. "If anything ever happens," he said quietly, "call June." I laughed it off. Nothing's going to happen. He didn't smile. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the first time I realized he was afraid. After that, I started noticing patterns I'd ignored before. Tessa always knew where Dad was supposed to be, who he'd spoken to, what he'd eaten, what time he'd taken his medication. If a friend stopped by unexpectedly, she'd position herself between them and the doorway, smiling while redirecting the conversation. "He's resting today. He's not up for company." It sounded considerate, until it didn't. Mail began arriving already opened. Dad's desk, once cluttered and familiar, became neat in a way that didn't feel like him. A locked drawer appeared where there hadn't been one before. When I asked about it, Tessa shrugged. "He asked me to organize things. You know how forgetful he's getting." That word stuck with me. Forgetful. Dad had always been meticulous. Dates, numbers, contracts. He remembered things that other people didn't. But now, when I asked him about conversations we'd had just days earlier, he hesitated. Sometimes he looked at me like he was searching for the right answer instead of remembering it. I told myself it was stressful. Age, grief catching up. When I moved to Austin for work, the distance made everything easier to dismiss. Out of sight, out of reach. We still talked, but less. When we did, he sounded distracted, occasionally confused. If I pushed too hard, Tessa would take the phone. "Don't overwhelm him," she'd say. "He needs calm." The last time I visited before everything fell apart, I stayed only 2 nights. Dad looked thinner. His hands trembled when he lifted his coffee mug. When Tessa stepped out to take a call, he reached across the table and touched my wrist. His grip was firmer than I expected. "She keeps changing things," he whispered. "What things?" I asked. He opened his mouth, then stopped. His eyes flicked toward the hallway. "I don't feel right," he said instead. "The pills make me foggy." Tessa returned before I could ask more. She placed a glass of water beside him. Set out 2 blue tablets. "Time for your meds," she said sweetly. Dad hesitated. "Just a second." Then he took them. That was the last real conversation we had. After that, my calls went unanswered. Or answered by Tessa. Always polite. Always vague. "He's sleeping. He's resting. He's had a long day." The night Logan called, I was still at the office, lights dim, laptop open. His voice was flat, almost bored. "Dad's in the hospital," he said. "What happened, I don't know. Mum said to tell you." Then the line went dead. I booked the next flight without thinking. At the hospital. Everything felt wrong immediately. The smell, the stillness, the way Tessa stood like a gatekeeper outside the ICU doors. "Family only," she said when I tried to pass. "I am family." She smiled like she pitied me. The nurse at the station checked her screen and frowned. His wife said only his children are here. I didn't understand how paperwork could erase blood, but it did. Hours passed. I watched Tessa and her kids go in and out of the room, laugh softly, whisper. I sat alone with the vending machine humming behind me. A nurse named Carla found me near the cafeteria late that night. She lowered her voice. "He asked for you," she said. "Earlier." My chest tightened. "We can try tomorrow," she added. "Late, after visiting hours." I didn't sleep. I watched the clock until my phone rang at dawn. "Your father passed away early this morning." I never saw him again. Everything after that moved too fast. Tessa took over the arrangements, picked a funeral home he'd never mentioned, a place that felt cold, expensive, nothing like him. When I arrived, I was directed to the back row. When I tried to approach the casket, a man stepped in front of me. "Family first," he said. That was when I understood. This wasn't about grief. It was about control. And someone had decided I no longer belonged. After the funeral, I stayed in town longer than I planned. I told my office I needed bereavement time. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. I stayed because something felt unfinished, like a conversation that had been cut off mid-sentence and never picked back up. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Tuesday. No one invited me. I found out by accident. A mutual friend of my father's mentioned it casually over the phone, assuming I'd already been told. "Tuesday at 2, he said, "at the firm downtown." When I showed up anyway, Tessa was already there. She stood just inside the conference room door, dressed in black again, composed, one hand resting lightly on the door frame like she owned the place. Logan and Brianna sat behind her. Quiet, avoiding my eyes. "This meeting is for heirs," Tessa said calmly when she saw me. "You were aware of that?" "I'm his daughter," I replied. She tilted her head, the way people do when they're pretending to be patient. Daniel made his wishes very clear. Logan finally looked at me then. His expression hardened. "You really think you deserve the same as us," he said. For what, the words landed heavier than I expected. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then I left. My hands were shaking by the time I reached the elevator, that night. I checked into a modest hotel near the courthouse. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, replaying everything. The hospital, the funeral, the door closed in my face. Every time I tried to make sense of it, the same question came back. Why go this far? June answered that question the next morning. She knocked softly. Once. Then again. When I opened the door, she glanced down the hallway before stepping inside. She looked smaller than I remembered, older. Her purse was clutched tightly against her chest. "I shouldn't be here," she said. "But your father asked me to do something." She reached into a bag and pulled out a sealed manila envelope. The wax seal was intact. Daniel's signet pressed deep into the red. "He gave this to me 6 months ago," June said. "Told me to deliver it to you if anything happened. In person. No one else." My hands trembled as I took it. "He said you'd know what to do," she added. "And Hannah, she's been going through files, firing people, burning documents, after she left." I sat on the bed for a long time before opening the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, a legal document sealed separately, and a small metal key taped to a card with a bank address and a safe deposit box number. My father's handwriting filled the page. He apologized. He admitted he'd trusted the wrong person. He wrote about documents being moved, medications changed, friends turned away. He told me he'd changed his will. Quietly, through another firm. Filed it. Notarized it. He told me he'd use what was in the box if Tessa contested it. By the time I finished reading, my chest hurt. The next morning, I went to the bank. The vault was quiet. Sterile. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. When the box opened, I knew immediately this wasn't just about inheritance. There were photographs. Time-stamped. Tessa met a man she'd called her ex. Entering hotels. Leaving my father's house when he was out of town. There were bank statements, wire transfers, highlighted in my father's careful handwriting. There was a USB drive. I waited until that night to listen. Tessa's voice was unmistakable, calm, casual. "Give him the blue ones first," she said. "He won't fight." I sat there, staring at the wall, realizing I wasn't dealing with greed. I was dealing with something much darker. After that night, I stopped thinking like a daughter. I started thinking like someone who needed facts. I copied everything from the box. Photos, statements, audio files. I labeled them. Dates, times, locations. I didn't jump to conclusions. I built a timeline the way my father would have, one line at a time. When the medication changes lined up with the wire transfers, my stomach turned cold. The next day, I met with Nora Beck. Her office was plain, no art, no distractions, just a desk, 2 chairs, and a legal pad already open when I walked in. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she didn't gasp. She didn't react the way people do when they're trying to be supportive. She just nodded. "This isn't a family disagreement," she said finally. "This is potential elder abuse." She filed an emergency motion that afternoon. Freeze the assets. Remove Tessa as executor pending review. Preserve all medical records. She warned me what would come next. "She'll try to scare you," Nora said. "And if that doesn't work, she'll try to bleed you dry." She wasn't wrong. That night, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. A man's voice. Low, calm. "You should stop digging," he said. "It won't end well." I hung up without responding. The next morning, my hotel door was ajar. Nothing was missing. Not obviously. My suitcase had been moved, a drawer left half open. The copy of my father's medical records I'd kept there was gone. I didn't need security footage to know someone had been inside. I changed hotels. I stopped using my real name at the desk. I started backing everything up twice. That afternoon, I got a text from Logan. "I need to talk." Not with Mom. Plaza Cafe, 10 a.m. I almost didn't go, but curiosity won. Logan looked different, tired, older. He didn't order anything, just sat there with his hands wrapped around a cold mug. "She's losing it," he said quietly. "Drinking. Burning papers in the backyard. I didn't speak. I found prescription bottles in her bathroom." He went on. "Dad's name. Labels ripped off." I felt my jaw tighten. "I'm not saying I know what she did," he said quickly, "but I know she made it impossible for you to see him. She said you were a distraction." "Will you tell the truth?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "If it comes to that." 2 days later, Brianna reached out. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town. She looked nothing like the girl I remembered. Her hand shook when she spoke. She promised me the house. She said everything would be better once your dad was gone. I didn't answer. She kept notes. Brianna whispered. About his meds, I thought it was just caregiving. She slid a notebook across the table. I didn't open it there. I didn't need to. The reading of the will was rescheduled. This time, I was invited. When I walked into the conference room, the air felt different. Tessa was still composed, but something in her eyes kept flicking toward the door. The attorney began reading the old will. Everything to her, nothing to me. I waited. When he finished, I stood and placed the sealed document on the table. "Read this," I said, "then we'll talk." The room went silent as the pages turned. When the clause about investigation was read aloud, Tessa's control finally cracked. "This is a lie," she snapped. He was confused. No one answered her. The meeting was adjourned. The paperwork would speak next. As I left the building, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. They thought they'd cut me out. All they really did was give me permission to stop protecting them. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Grey sky, cold air. The kind that settles into your bones and stays there. I arrived early and sat on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, hands folded in my lap, breathing slow. I wasn't nervous the way I thought I'd be. I felt focused, like everything before this had been rehearsal. Tessa arrived 10 minutes later. She looked different without control of the room. Her posture was stiff. Her smile came and went too fast. Logan followed behind her, eyes down. Brianna wasn't there. Inside. The room smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. The judge took a seat. The attorney stood. Everyone sat. And just like that, my father's life was reduced to documents stacked neatly on a table. Tessa's lawyer spoke first. He talked about grief, confusion, a grieving widow taken advantage of by a resentful daughter. He said Daniel's health had been failing, that he was vulnerable, that I'd pressured him, manipulated him, that the revised will was suspicious. I listened without reacting. Then Nora stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize anything. She laid out dates, timelines, filing records, notary stamps, witness affidavits. She placed my father's revised will into evidence and let it sit there, unarguable. This document, she said calmly, was executed 6 months before Mr. Pierce's death. It was prepared by an independent firm. It was filed with the state. It contains explicit language revoking all prior wills. The judge nodded. Then came the clause, the one my father had written, knowing exactly who would read it. In the event of my death under suspicious circumstances, I direct that a full review of my medical treatment be conducted, including toxicology screening and examination of all medications administered in the final 6 months of my life. The room shifted. Tessa leaned forward in her seat, hands gripping the armrests. Her lawyer objected. The judge overruled him. Next, Nora called June. June's voice shook at first, then steadied. She spoke about my father's fear, about documents being moved, about instructions given quietly, about the envelope, the seal, the date, the time. Then Logan was called. Tessa turned to him sharply. Her mouth formed his name. He didn't look at her. He testified to what he'd seen. The bottles, the labels torn off, the papers burned, the nights his mother drank and paced, the things she said when she thought no one was listening. Tessa stared straight ahead. When it was her turn, she stood slowly, composed again, the widow, the victim. She spoke about love, about sacrifice, about how I'd moved away, about how she'd been the one there every day. Nora didn't interrupt. She waited. Then she asked about the wire transfers, about the man in the photographs, about the medication journal. Tessa hesitated. Just once. It was enough. The judge called a recess. When she returned, her ruling was short. The revised will was valid. The prior will was revoked. Tessa was removed as executor, effective immediately. All estate assets were frozen pending further investigation. The matter was referred to the district attorney for review of potential elder abuse. Tessa's breath hitched audibly. As we exited the courtroom, a detective approached me. He introduced himself, asked about the medical records, about the USB, about the box. I nodded. That afternoon, the toxicology report came back. My father had been given medication he was never prescribed. The kind that makes you compliant, confused, quiet. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something settle, like a truth finally landing where it belonged. They thought the will was the end of the story. For me, it was the moment everything finally told the truth. After the ruling, everything went quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The house was still locked. Tessa hadn't moved out yet. Her lawyer said she needed time. I didn't argue. I didn't need the space right away. I needed distance. Nora warned me that this wasn't over. Removing her as executor didn't erase what she'd done. It just exposed it. Investigations take time. Paper moves slowly. People lie until they can't anymore. I went back to my hotel and laid everything out on the bed. Copies of filings, the USB, the photos, the notebook Brianna had given me. My father's handwriting was everywhere. In margins, in underlines, in small notes reminding himself to be careful. That night, I got a voicemail. It was Tessa. Her voice was tight, controlled. "You think you've won," she said, "but you don't know who you're dealing with." I deleted it without replying. The next morning, Nora called. The district attorney wanted a full accounting. Medical records, pharmacy logs, surveillance footage from the hospital. My father's samples had been preserved. I didn't celebrate. I made coffee. I watched it cool on the counter. There was one more thing in the safe deposit box I hadn't mentioned yet. A thin file my father had labeled simply prior. Inside was a report from a private investigator. It outlined another marriage, another older man, another sudden heart failure, another family cut out. Same pattern, different names. My father knew. He hadn't just protected me. He'd left a trail. As I packed up to leave the hotel, I realized something. I wasn't chasing revenge. I wasn't trying to punish her. I was making sure the truth couldn't be buried under paperwork again. They thought they could erase me, reminding me I was replaceable. What they didn't understand was this: I remember everything, and paper has a long memory. The weeks after everything settled were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just quiet. I spent most mornings alone at a small kitchen table in my rental, coffee going cold beside me while I stared at nothing in particular. My shoulders stayed tense even when there was nothing left to brace for. Winning didn't feel like joy. It felt like finally being able to breathe after holding it too long. When I was cleared to enter the house, I went alone. The key felt heavier than it should have. The door opened to stillness. No music, no voices. Just the low hum of the HVAC and the faint smell of wood and dust. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel like it belonged to anyone. I walked slowly, room to room, like a guest, in my father's study. The desk was cleared except for one drawer that hadn't been locked properly. Inside, I found a folded piece of paper, a grocery list in his handwriting. Milk, coffee, bread, and at the bottom, my name, just written there, no context. I sat down and held it for a long time. It wasn't a message. It wasn't an apology. It was proof that, even near the end, I existed in his everyday thoughts. That mattered more than any document. June stopped by later that week. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, hands clasped, unsure of her place now. She apologized for not doing more sooner, for staying quiet. I told her I understood. I meant it. But I didn't rush forgiveness. Some silences take time to settle. Logan sent a short text. Just checking in, no excuses, no explanations. I replied once. Brief, civil. Boundaries felt necessary, not cruel. Healing came in small, practical choices. I changed the locks. I opened one window, threw out the flowers that had dried and browned in their vases. I left my father's study exactly as it was. Some things didn't need fixing. One afternoon, I found an old photo tucked behind a bookshelf. My mother and father on a dock, laughing, sunburned, happy. I placed it back on the wall where it used to hang. I would trade the house, the money, all of it, for one moment where my father chose me openly while he was alive. But I don't get to rewrite his choices. I only get to decide what I accept now. As I left the house that day, my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. A document update. Another account. Another piece still unresolved. I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. Whatever comes next, I'm paying attention. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay connected here. This story wasn't about money. It was about what people do when they think you won't push back. If this feels familiar, subscribe. Share it with someone who's been quietly erased by family decisions. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. I read everyone,